We're back. We're live. Here it is on a Tuesday afternoon in Think Tech Talks with the series we call Community Matters. That's a double entendre. And we're talking today that no one has to die alone, which happens to be the title of a book recently written by our special guest, Lani Leary, PhD, author and psychologist and expert in dying.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Great to have you. This is our second media experience together, as I recall.
Yes.
And the first was on radio only. It was a wonderful experience. You're an expert in death and dying. How in the world did you get to be an expert in death and dying?
Well, life kind of happened to me, and when I was 13 years old, my mother died suddenly and unexpectedly. And I knew in order to cope and survive from that I had to find meaning in it. I had to make something good out of it. And so the only way out for me was to do something constructive with it. And I vowed that no other child was going to feel the kind of grief unattended that I did. And so I went to school and I studied counseling and psychology and worked in many hospices across the United States, and found opportunities to learn from patients who were dying and their families, and turn it around and use it for others. And that helped me. That helped me.
Yeah, in dealing with your own personal grief
It
and
did.
guilt, whatever comes out of that.
Right. Well, I learned about my grief. I filled in holes with information that I wasn't given when I was younger. And you can transform your grief. You know, when women have babies, we are in physical pain, but we're not suffering because we have a gift at the end of our pain.
Yeah, positive outcome.
Exactly. And I think a death, a loss can be a tragedy, or if you get something out of it, if your life is transformed because of it, I think that it's no longer suffering. And that was my goal.
Can we just hold on that point and look at that point a little more closely? What's the positive outcome in a good death, in a death well attended?
Oh, there's so many positive outcomes. In a good death, the patient who's dying feels respected, feels seen and known and honored and validated. And in a good death, the person who is dying has their wishes honored, and others are there to support and honor those wishes. In a good death, there is a minimal amount of pain, and we are attending to that pain. In a good death, there are no final words that are left unsaid. So the reconciliation has happened, and the forgiveness has happened, and the thank yous have happened, and we've said our I love yous. There's nothing left unsaid.
Am I right to say that usually going into that passage, that there usually needs to be a reconciliation, that there usually needs to be special words spoken of thank you, of reconciliation, and that it's more like the rule than the exception to find that loved ones have things they really need to talk about that they haven't talked about for one reason or another in their lifetime?
Well, I think that's part of the big movement about having the difficult conversations, and it's how I spend a lot of my time encouraging individuals and families to have those difficult conversations, so that now, before you are diagnosed with a terminal illness, you have created your legacy, you've made decisions about what you want done, and you've had those conversations before there's any emotional distress.
With like death and dying?
Yes.
But that's very hard. I mean, by definition, most people don't do that.
It is the exception in our culture. But if people had vocabulary to begin with, if they had a role model of what it looks like and what it sounds like,
it is the death scenario.
Yes.
The death scenario encourages you.
No, the difficult conversation scenario.
Okay.
So in my work, I'm often called into families to be that role model, to encourage that conversation around the kitchen table. And what I do in families is give you the language, give you the topics that might be discussed. And then I'll even practice and rehearse with family members so that they know what it sounds like. And the more experience, the more vocabulary a family has, the more experience they have, the more confidence they have, and the less difficult it is. It becomes normal. It can be as fluid and as simple as conversing with your son about the transition of going off to college. How does he prepare? What does he want? What choices are there for him? And how will we be when he leaves?
I think a lot of people, bury things in their lives that they should be talking about with loved ones, and those buried things, don't come out until something makes them come out.
Right.
And this pre-death scenario, family together scenario that you're talking about, is one way for that to happen. But it must be hard, and I'm just trying to imagine it. Does this scenario happen with you there?
Yes.
You're at the table.
Well, oftentimes I'm called in to coach a family. And I find that families do need to be given permission, and they need to be given a structure of, this is the roadmap to follow. These are the things to discuss. These are the questions that you might have. And as a therapist, I can sit with you, and as the difficult feelings come up, I can help you to work through those feelings.
Isn't it risky? I mean, in the sense that maybe these things are painful, maybe they cause anger. I mean, and then the family consultation aspect of it. Maybe the people are going to be mad at each other if they find out what they've really been thinking all these years, kind of thing. And how do you deal with that? I mean, if there's a certain risk that instead of doing good, it tears things up, isn't there? Isn't there a risk like that?
Well, we're talking about people's honest needs and their values. And if we can learn to respect values even though they differ, and respect different people's needs even though they differ, I think we can work through that. I think that there's a greater risk of not doing it.
Oh, sure.
There's a greater risk across the board for relationships, for health, for finances, for how people are remembered. And I think it's your responsibility to let your values and your wishes be known instead of putting that burden on your family and asking them to guess and to second guess,
right,
and to live after you're gone,
right, and
wondering,
pick up the pieces.
wondering whether they did it right.
Yeah.
I think you abdicate responsibility if you don't share your values and your wishes.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to do that ahead of time, before the distress of a terminal illness.
I worked for an admiral one time, years ago, when I was in the service, and he found out that he was going to die one day. And he was a district commander here in Honolulu. And he called his staff, and I was a member of his staff, into his office one fine morning, and he said, "Look, I've had it. This is the end for me, and here's what I want to do with this Coast Guard district." And he laid it out. Everybody had an assignment, and they were going to make it, a very, a rational, valid transition. And I thought that was really good. Did you talk to him?
Well, and how much easier it was for those that followed him to know exactly what he wanted, what he wished. And then they could be competent and they could follow those wishes. And what a different feeling in their grief that they were able to contribute to how he passed.
Yes.
Because they were doing what he asked. But they were doing what he asked because they knew what he wished.
Yes.
And that was the responsibility that he took. So, kudos to him.
So the operative thing is participation. And, it's a great gift. It's a gift to be able to give a gift.
Oh,
You know what I
it
mean?
makes such a difference to the family members. And I know personally, not being able to contribute to my mother's last days and how she died, my grief was such torment. And the difference between 45 years later being able to help my father die and fully participating in his death, my grief was so different. And that didn't have to do with my age difference as much as my full contribution and my
And the
participation.
learning experience you'd had the first time. Yeah.
How much I was able to give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one question. You talked about the family scenario early on before we get into the death scenario. When you do that, do you do it in contemplation of death? I mean, do you say to the family say to themselves, we're, opening up here. We're comparing notes on a really basic level because we don't want to have this, we don't want to kick it down the road. We want to do it now. We don't want to have to do it at the last minute. Is that part of the reason for the family discussion?
Well, hopefully, it's so interesting, Jay, because most people don't start a conversation like this saying, when I die. They usually talk about if I die.
Yeah, I'm never going to die.
As though if we don't talk about this, it's never going to happen. And I think that's
sure.
many people's motivation. If I don't talk about it, death isn't going to find me. I'm hiding out. And no, we need to have this conversation because death is going to happen to us. And the other thing that's really relevant here is that 90% of people die from an illness or an age-related circumstance. And so we have the time to have these conversations. People don't use the choices and the power that they have. And so I talk about doing this as a gift for your loved ones. Let this be your last gift, their peace of mind, that they were able to give you something at the very end.
And they should feel good about it going forward.
They can feel good.
That they did the
yes.
right thing. They had the chance to do the right thing. They did the right thing.
Right.
And it all worked out,
Right.
Better than it usually does.
Otherwise, if we don't have this kitchen conversation, then as you're dying and perhaps unconscious, the siblings are arguing and saying, well, Dad told me this a year ago, and this sibling over
Sure.
here is saying, no, I heard he said something
Happens
else.
all the
And so
time.
instead of coming together to support each other and comfort each other, the family is torn apart,
Yeah.
and that doesn't have to happen.
Yeah. And integrated with that, I'm sure, is the whole estate planning process.
Oh my goodness.
Because if you make a mistake, and I mean an emotional mistake, so a family mistake, about how you're dealing with your estate. For example, you're hoo-hoo about one child about something, so you give them $1.50. And,
Yeah.
and then you give everything else to another child. And they're really, it's not just how you feel, it's the effect you want to leave with your family, with your progeny.
Right, it's the emotional legacy as well as the financial
Right.
legacy. And you've made this decision perhaps without communicating the meaning behind your decision.
Right, and then they hate each other, and their lives. And this, I think you're talking about this maybe in a different context, but for their whole lives,
The ripple
they're unsettled.
effect of generations.
Generations,
Generations,
right.
yeah.
And the whole thing is it's on the ancestry chart already about how it didn't work in that
Right.
generation.
And how different it could be if you had the courage, the vocabulary, and the model to ask that everyone sit down at the table so you could discuss your values, your wishes, and what it means to you.
But I think the reality, Lani, is that I think most people need to have a counselor or an advisor like you,
It helps.
who would come and help them through this, because it's not in the normal course. And I mean, I take it this is the primary area of your practice, just as you originally contemplated.
Yes, the part of my psychotherapy practice I love the most is helping people at the end of life and helping the bereaved.
Now, that's actually the most challenging part of any psychology practice, isn't it?
It's my greatest joy.
Yeah.
I love it the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to before we take the break, I just want to talk briefly about the movie we're going to show here on the show. Here, the name of your book is "No One Has to Die Alone," and you gave a TEDx here in Honolulu a couple of years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
And I found it. I just Googled you, and there it was. And it is a remarkable movie where you talk about your own life and your own transition into this, and your rules. You have 3 rules of caring, for your relatives in the situation. And I want to say that it's a lovely, lovely movie, and
Thank
so
you.
much so that I hope you don't mind. We're going to take 10 or 15 minutes out of our show and play it.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
So we're going to take a break now, and then when we come back, we're going to play that movie for a few minutes, and then after the movie, we'll talk about the movie.
Okay. Thank you.
That's Lani Leary. She's an author and psychologist specializing in death and dying, and she wrote a book. She's written many books, but she wrote a book recently entitled "No One Has to Die Alone." Here on Think Tech Talks, we're talking about it in our Community Matters series. We'll be right back.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on Think Tech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
We're back. We're live. I'm here with Lani Leary, PhD, author and psychologist, who wrote a book recently called "No One Has to Die Alone." And here we are talking with her as a matter of community matters here on Think Tech Talks. And for this part of the show, as I mentioned before the break, we'll take a look at Lani in her TEDx speech. And let me add that if you don't know what TEDx is for remarkable people who are able to make remarkable speeches. We all wish we could make TEDx speeches. You'll see how good this one is. We don't usually play, movies of this length in our shows, but we're making a special exception here for the movie from Lani Leary. So we'll take a few minutes. We'll watch the TEDx featuring Lani Leary and No One Has to Die Alone. We'll be right back after that movie and we can discuss it.
We are going to die, but I believe that how we die matters. It matters not just to the person who is dying, it will matter to the loved ones who will grieve, and it will matter to the next generation to whom we are teaching values and what it means to be part of a family and part of a larger community. I also believe that no one has to die alone. And we can make a difference so that our loved one, as they die, will not feel abandoned or emotionally distant. I want to leave you today with 3 simple but profound things that you can do to make a difference when your loved one dies. I've had the great honor and privilege of being at the bedside of more than 500 people as they died. And they taught me so much about dying, but also about living. They changed how I live. And so it's about time that I shared their lessons with you, their legacy that they want to pass on. And I feel as though all 500 are here with me today. What they taught me allowed me to help my father die, which was one of the greatest privileges of my life. My dad called me a couple years ago to tell me that it wasn't pneumonia, it was end-stage cancer that was distressing him so much. And so I closed my practice and I flew home to take care of him. I hoped that we had 3 months, but it turned out to be just 2 weeks. But it was on his timing. And in that time that we had together, we talked honestly and directly about his death. And I asked him questions like, Dad, who do you want to be with you? What do you want? What do you not want? What do you want to do before you die? Let's make that happen. It was my job to be his advocate and to be his supporter. I was there to support and make sure that his values and his wishes were followed through. So on a morning that I didn't know would be his last, I sat by his bedside and held his hand. And he reached up and yanked out the oxygen tube and said, "No more." And I knew exactly what he meant because we had gone over that scenario. And because I was there to support him, he got no argument from me. Instead, I crawled up onto his bed and I cradled him in my arms. I stroked him and I whispered to him, "Dad, I love you. It's okay to go. We'll be okay." And I held him like that for an hour as his breath got slower and more shallow, and he breathed his last breath. That was my last gift to him, and it was his last gift to me, and you'll understand why in a moment. It was his most profound gift to me. I am comfortable with death, and I'm at ease with people who are dying. In fact, it's what I'm most passionate about because I know it makes a difference. And so I lean into the experience, and I look for opportunities and ways to serve the dying. But it was not always this way. I was not always so comfortable with death and illness. I didn't know what to say or what to do around people who were dying. What I was able to do for my father, I did not do for my mother. Because when I was 13 years old, my mother had a rare illness, and in my family, as I suspect it is in many, we didn't talk about illness, and we certainly didn't talk about death and dying. And so I didn't have the language, and I had no context for what was happening in my family. I was not taught skills, and I certainly didn't have any models for what it looked like to help someone who was dying. And so one morning when she woke up and I could tell that she was really ill, I did the only thing that I knew how to do. I made her cinnamon toast. And then I took my two younger brothers down the road to play, thinking that my mother might be able to sleep while we were gone. And when I returned later in that afternoon, her bed was empty. There was a note from a neighbor saying that she had taken my mother to the hospital. My mother never came home. I never saw my mother again. I never got to say goodbye. I was left with guilt and regret that exaggerated my grief for years and years. I thought, I believed that I had left my mother alone, to die alone, and that her last impression of her only daughter was that I didn't care enough to be with her. I never wanted to feel that way again, and I don't want any of you to ever experience that grief. I never wanted to feel unprepared, unwilling, or unable to help another loved one at the end of their life. And so I vowed to make some meaning out of this tragedy. I vowed to find something good that I could use in my life from this. And so I took myself to school as an adult, and I studied everything I could about death and dying and grief. I earned advanced degrees, and I specialized in thanatology, which is the study of death and dying. And then I worked in hospitals and many hospices across the United States so that I could see different kinds of death and different needs. And those hundreds and hundreds of generous people taught me what mattered. They taught me what mattered to them, and that how they died did matter. And then they gave me the skills and the attitudes, the information, so that I could help others. We may not be able to change the outcome. We can't hold back death, but we can change the process. What the dying taught me will matter to you, because someone you love is going to die. And while a small percentage dies suddenly and unexpectedly, about 80% of our loved ones will die from an illness or an age-related circumstance. And that's important, because that means that you have time You have time to learn the attitudes and the skills and the information that will make a difference. You may be afraid when you hear that your loved one is dying. You may not know what to do or what to say. You may be afraid you're going to do the wrong thing. But I'm telling you, I'm asking you, I'm encouraging you just to participate, to bring an open heart to the experience, to lean into them instead of talking to them from the doorway. Just participate. Because while you're afraid, the dying are afraid too. But would you like to know what the dying are most afraid of? It will surprise you. The research and the dying that I have spoken with tell me that it is not their imminent death that they're most afraid of. No, no. Because as illness takes our body and as the quality of our life degenerates to such a point that it cannot be reversed, death is no longer the enemy. And the dying come to a level of acceptance. And the dying do not fear most their physical pain, because in today's age, with medicine and palliative care, comfort care medicine, and the interventions of hospice, we can alleviate physical suffering. What the dying are most afraid of is being emotionally abandoned, of not having you there with them, of no longer feeling connected to their loved ones, of no longer feeling valued. So here's what the dying have taught me. They've taught me a lot. What I want to leave you with today are 3 important things. The dying need you to listen to them. They need you to listen to that same story you may have heard 100 times. But that story is important to them because it helps them to sort through their life and to find meaning, to process their feelings, and to finish business. They need you to listen to them without judgment. Are they dying right? They need you to listen to them without assumptions, really listening to them openly so that who they are today is okay and it may be different than who they were yesterday. And listen without comparisons. And listening well means that we are comfortable with silence. We don't fill the room with chatter and things that are inconsequential now. We are just present with them. Second, the dying need you to touch them. Touch. Because at the end of life, they so often feel ugly, untouchable, undesirable. And what they really need is for you to go to them and communicate through your touch that they are still the same person you have always loved. So touch. Hold their hand, massage their back, comb her hair, stroke his arm, but touch. Because touch communicates so beyond words when we can't find the words. And third, the dying need you to give them permission to let go. They need to know from you that their death is not a failure and their death is not abandonment. So in whatever words you can find, communicate to them that you will be okay, that it's okay for them to go on. There's a ripple effect when we care and offer compassion in this way. It matters to the dying person, to those of us who are caretaking and grieving, and it matters to the next generation. That next generation and the generation and the generation will now have reduced fears about death because they'll see you near it. They'll have less myths and assumptions about it. And when it's your time to die, they will be there for you because you showed them how. I'd like to end with a story that illustrates the ripple effect of how multiple generations can come together. Recently, my mother-in-law called and told us that she was dying. and there was nothing more that could be done. So we flew across the country to be with her. We asked Nana what she needed, what she wanted. Nana said that she wanted to die at home, she wanted to be surrounded by her family, and when it was her time to go, she didn't want any arguments. So we brought her home with hospice. We set her up at a bed in front of a picture window so that she could look out on her favorite garden. We called all 25 family members in from around the country. And when they were there, we each took time alone with her to listen to her stories, to what was important to her. We touched her. We cared for her. We sat up all night and stood watch over her. And after she had spoken with each one of us, she said she was ready to die. So we all came together, almost a sacred circle of silence, and stood around her, and we waited. And it wasn't too much longer. But a son-in-law was at the foot of her bed, softly playing a guitar, and a daughter at the head of her bed, humming her favorite hymn, one grandchild holding this hand, and another grandchild holding this, and we waited. And soon afterward, she took her last breath. And out from this silence, with tears streaming over our cheeks, the littlest voice from the youngest grandchild piped up and said, "You know, dying's not so bad. When it's my time to go, I hope I get to die just like Nana." So I bring to you the gifts from the dying because I believe that you can make a difference, and I know you want to. My hope for you is that in the end, that you remember the love and not the loss, and you are filled with a gratitude rather than grief. I know you can make a difference, and I trust that you will. Thank you.
Wow, what footage that was. What a great TED Talk. I was impressed the first time I saw it, and I'm equally impressed now, Lani. So, you know, it takes a lot to make a TED Talk. Now, not everybody can do it, and you certainly have the ability to connect with the audience based on your time as a professor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyway, that is on YouTube right now. It's a primer in many ways. It's very useful, very organized information. Anyone would benefit by watching it, and it's a great gift, that movie. And so we are going to put the link for it on the screen. Our production manager, Ian Davidson, is going to put the link for it on the screen, and you'll be able to go to YouTube and look at it. But you can just go do what I did. Go to YouTube and search on Lani Leary, Lani Leary. And likewise, you can go to her website, which is that's Dr. Lani Leary, .com, where you can find all kinds of stuff out about her and what she does. With that said, I'd like to take our second break, and we'll come back and we'll reflect on that movie, and we'll analyze that movie, and we'll drill down on the concepts that you rolled out in that movie.
Okay.
We're here with Lani Leary, PhD. Dr. Leary has recently written No One Has to Die Alone, and that's the name of our show. She's an author and psychologist here in Community Matters on Think Tech Talks. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
We're back. We're live here on Think Tech Talks, Community Matters, with Dr. Lani Leary, author and psychologist, author of a book, No One Has to Die Alone, and that's the title of our show. So we've seen that movie, and it's as good the second time as the first time. It's a great movie, and you are a great connector, and you know, kind of an emotional philanthropist.
I've been called worse.
So what should we take away? Those 3 points that struck me as very valuable. That's your message in general, isn't it?
It is my message. It's the message that has been given to me from all the dying patients that I've been with. And of course, that's a big generalization, and that might not be true for everyone, but that's what I heard asked for over and over and over again. You know, I worked through the beginning of the 80s during the AIDS epidemic, and I'm not kidding that I oftentimes was the only person that was touching a patient, and medical personnel would be at the door almost passing medication, you know, so that they didn't have to be clear. But, you know, I mean, even recently I was in the hospital and went to touch a patient with his permission, which I want to say a little bit about. And he said to me, "You're the first person in 3 days you're the first skin that I have felt in 3 days. The only other thing that has touched me was a stethoscope or a gloved hand." 3 days, and I think people are really skin hungry.
Yeah.
So
in life in general, we live in a world where touching can cause a lawsuit already, and so people don't touch as much perhaps as they used to.
Right.
Especially at the end of life.
Yeah, and I will say, you know, in Hawaii, in a multicultural community that we have, there are cultures that aren't as comfortable with touching. And so they'll ask me about this. Well, how would I touch my loved one in a family where we've never hugged? And my response to that is that there really are many ways to touch, and that when I touch your skin with your permission,
You can touch me. It's okay.
when I touch you with your permission, what I'm doing is connecting.
Yeah.
But I can connect just as easily when I have direct eye contact.
Yeah.
And so in cultures for which it wouldn't be authentic to touch skin to skin, and it might not even be comfortable, there are different ways that we can connect, but that's the message, to connect.
Let me ask though, I mean, even in a culture which doesn't, you know, particularly get excited about touching still has an effect, doesn't it?
It has a chemical effect
Yeah.
in the body. We can measure it.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to connect that
What
way.
about a person who is non-compass, you know, who's lying there in the bed, you know, lots of drugs, whatnot? Is touching going to have some salutary subconscious effect too?
Touching does, and I can't tell you the number of patients that I've been with who've been comatose, and I speak to them as though they were conscious. I touch them as though they were conscious, and there have been several who have come out of the coma, even though the doctors have said that this person's brain dead and we can't reverse it. I've had a number come out of a coma and be able to tell me verbatim what I said and know that I touched them. And you know, the message is I want to treat my loved one with as much dignity as I can, and that means treating you the way you have been when you were alive.
As a person.
As a person, as a whole person, not a damaged person, not a person with no awareness, but as a full person that deserves my love and attention and interest. Yeah.
All the more important, as you said in your TEDx speech, people who are dying see themselves as damaged, as ugly, as well, nobody wants to touch or look at her and so forth. And when you touch and when you talk to somebody like that or listen to them, you're really saying it's okay that you don't look so good.
Well, I'm saying that I love you as much as I always have. I care about you. I'm connected to you. And you are still here. Very important.
But you're speaking as a family member. I mean, the words coming out, or you seem to be talking as a family member. Suppose I'm just a friend. Suppose I'm a person who wants to help, even just an acquaintance who has no one else. And I want to do this out of human kindness.
I would behave exactly the same way. I would touch, I would listen, and I would give you permission for your own timing in your own way. Yeah, I would be present for you in ways that were meaningful to you.
Let's talk about listening for a moment. You know, I mean, a lot of people through their lives in our 21st century nuclear world, they don't listen. They characterize, they profile everybody about everything. They figure if they got a few, you know, anchor points on you. That's all they need to know, and the rest of it, it's all generalization.
We don't teach attention very well.
Yeah.
Everything is quick and moving and one subject to another, and we lack the curiosity, the real genuine interest in each other, in your heart, in what you care about, in what something means to you, and all of that I have to stay with and ask about. And give you permission to change every single day. And I think that that's a real important lesson that I've learned over the 30 years, and I try to teach to others in hospice, and that is that even though I've seen a patient day in and day out, every single day, or a loved one day in and day out, I want to enter your room as though I know nothing about you, as though I'm a clean slate, so that I have my ears open for where you are in this moment, giving you permission to
change,
to change, to
be a
discover,
different person every
yes,
moment.
to discover things, and one of the reasons that patients will tell me nobody listens to me is because so often at the end of life, a person needs to tell the same story over and over again, and what they hear is, "Oh, you already told me that." And we cut them off, when what they really need is they need time, they need permission, they need an audience perhaps to really investigate that and go down paths that they hadn't before, or to gain insight into this story and what it means to them.
Because it may mean a lot,
Oh.
even though you can't tell.
Oh,
right-
it may
right
mean
away.
closure for their life.
And that's why it's okay to repeat the story, because he's really asking you to validate that and to find maybe something that he himself doesn't
Exactly.
see in that story.
And not only is it okay, it's important.
Yeah.
It's important. Yeah.
What's the third rule?
The third rule is, it's not a rule, but an encouragement, is to give people permission at the end of life to go on. And so often, and
Permission to die.
permission to die, because I've heard from patients after their loved ones leave the room, they'll say to me, she thinks I'm abandoning her if I die, or I'm so afraid that they'll think I failed. Because, we use terminology like we're fighting cancer and this is the battle of our life and things like that. And so if I die, I'm afraid of how you're going to interpret that I gave up on you, I didn't care enough about you to fight hard, to stay around longer. And we need to tell our loved one that it's okay, that
But
we
wait,
all
but wait.
die and that there is a time.
I want to throw one at you. So, isn't there something to the thing about fighting cancer?
Absolutely.
If I fight, if I gird my loins and focus my will, maybe I'll live longer. How do you reconcile
I
that?
would never take that value away from you. I would never take that dream away from you. I don't encourage, in fact, I support denial, because denial can be a very functional coping strategy. But when you're on your deathbed, when it's time to give up. And to have family members around not letting you go. And I work with people all the time who say, I can't let him go, as though it's their timing and their agenda, when really it's about the patients living and dying. It's there. And that's one of the things that I try to teach, is that, everybody gets a vote in their life. You have planned your life. You have made decisions for your life. Make decisions and plans for your death. And I don't get a vote on your death.
Right.
I get to vote on my death,
Right.
but I should not be interfering in your process, because it should be, hopefully, your death is a reflection of your life.
Right. So you don't want the I guess the person dying to feel guilty
No.
about dying.
No.
You have to let him take his own way, move in his own direction, act on his own vote, so to speak, rather than feel guilty that he's leaving you and not
He's done something wrong.
Done something
No,
wrong.
No. It's his time to die. We all have a time.
Yeah.
None of us get out of this alive. And
So-
it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Let's make death okay.
Yeah. So walking out of the room, walking out of life, the decedent and the family, how would you like them? How do you think optimally they should be feeling?
Well, I wouldn't use the word should. When family members are leaving the room after a loved one has died, I want them to have whatever feelings they have.
Which is going to be grief.
In some cases, not always. And if we are supporting a family who's lost a loved one, we need to not make assumptions. Because if a parent has died and a child isn't exhibiting grief, there may be relief. This parent may have
suffered.
this parent may have suffered. This parent may also have been an abuser all their life. And so there's great relief that that's not a part. We can't make the assumption. And you know, we have a lot of myths in our culture about grief. And one of them is that how you loved should be reflected in how you grieve.
The flip side.
So I will see a lot of couples in my practice, my therapy practice, and a woman is, this is a generalization, but a woman is usually, has an easier time expressing her feelings and emoting through crying. And I'll see the husband in this case, and he appears to be more stoic, and he doesn't express himself with the same words or the same emotions. And her assumption looking at him is that he doesn't care as much. He didn't love as much. And so that is a myth, that this man, because he's not showing grief in the same way as a woman, is not feeling as deeply or as intensely, and that is not accurate. And so we need to give people permission and space and time to feel whatever grief looks like for them. And grief goes up and down and roller coasters, and it surges, especially around holiday times or around the anniversary of something a time that's meaningful. We need to give people as much time as they need to move through it, not get over it.
How does Hawaii differ from, you've practiced in this area a number of places in the country, moving around. How does Hawaii differ from other places, culturally and in practice?
There are cultural differences. When I was in a hospice in the South, the funerals were joyous, loud celebrations. Very, very vocal, very athletic almost, And then when I worked up north, much more reserved and contained and stoic. So the expression of grief is authentic in both places and very different. And we need to be able to bring that cultural rituals into the practice at the end of life. And when we don't do that, we cut off a person's legacy and meaning. So for example, I was practicing in Washington, and a Native American woman, at the end of life, her family wanted to burn sage. Well, of course, she couldn't do that in the ICU. And to not be able to do that really inhibited their expression of letting go. Had she been able to die at home, that experience at the end of life would have been very different, and the meaning pieces would have been in place for them. So we want to ask those questions. In your culture, how do you say goodbye, and how can I support that? In your culture, how do you grieve? How can I support that? What's the language that you use? What's helpful? What's not helpful? Yeah.
And
that's what we can do for each other in our culture in Hawaii.
Even in the same culture.
Oh.
There are variations on the theme, and
right.
Everybody has his own personal culture.
Absolutely. Within a family.
Yeah.
There are different cultures even within a family. Absolutely. So we need to pay attention. We need to listen. We need to honor. Yeah.
Last question, Lani. It's a question I'm not sure I ever asked you before, and that is, here you are. You've dedicated your life to this, and you've done well at it, and you've learned about it and given the gift of emotional philanthropy to a lot of people. But doesn't it take something out of you to deal with these difficult situations around you?
See, I don't want to say that end of life isn't difficult. It is difficult, but it's so real, and it's such an honor to be invited into people's lives when they are at their most vulnerable, and they're so real, and there's such a connection that I carry so many people with me. I don't think they're gone, you know. It's been such a gift in my life, and I can't imagine doing anything different. So I absolutely know that I get more than I give. I know that.
Okay, if I forget. Lani Leary, PhD, author and psychologist, recently wrote No One Has to Die Alone, and we have had the honor of having her on our show here at Community Matters on the Think Tech Talks series. Thank you so much, Lani.
Thank you.